Hey writer rebels, we all know that bad things happen and sometimes that can really mess with our writing schedule. So today I'm going to give you some tips on how to write through it all and get back on that writing horse when your heart says yes, but your creative brain is definitely saying no. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Scarlett Kol and I'm a young adult author, YouTuber, and storyteller. If you have come here before or you are a subscriber, thank you so much for coming back and I really hope you enjoy this video. If you would like to see more content from me, make sure you're hitting that subscribe bar and the notification bell to let you know when I have a new video coming up, which is typically on Thursdays. All right, so today's video is called Write Through It All. The reason this started was essentially a video about writing through the rejection process and how that can take a toll on your mind. However, I started thinking about other situations where it is really difficult to get words down on the page. So this could be, after a breakup, it could be when you're grieving, it could be stress at work with your kids, with your friends, whatever, through rejections, like I mentioned before, or, being quarantined for 3 or 4 weeks because the entire world is on lockdown. Either way, a lot of these things can have a huge amount of stress on your mind and on your emotions, which makes it really difficult to write. Some people thrive on this sort of stuff and they will basically, it will fuel them to get tons and tons of words down and use this as therapy. But for a lot of people, it is really difficult to get back to writing those pages after you've been dealing with something that is very heavy and very emotional and very stressful. Personally, when I deal with some traumatic events, I do like to take some time off from my writing. However, that could be a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a month, whatever I feel is necessary. But that's not always the case and is not always something that is feasible. If you're working on a deadline, then you probably need to get back a lot faster. Or some people find that getting back into writing and getting back into their routine creates a sense of normalcy and makes it easier for them to continue going forward and to move on with their lives. However, those first few days, few weeks, few months after something traumatic happening can make it very, very difficult to have your creative juices flowing and get that muse back into shape. So just like going to the gym, sometimes if you take a really long break, it is difficult to get back to the same level of output that you had prior to whatever incident has been bothering you. So here are some tips to try and get back to who you were as a writer and up to the same level that you were before, or at least try to battle through whatever it is that you're dealing with. I do want to caution that I am not a doctor, and if you are dealing with something that is a little heavier on the mental health scale, that some of these tips may be helpful for you, but that is something that you probably need to discuss with your healthcare professional as opposed to listening to somebody on YouTube. All right, then let's get started. The first thing I would recommend is possibly knowing your limits and lowering your expectations. Sure, that can sound a little disappointing, but the fact is, if you've been away from it for a while or you're dealing with other things in your head, it can be really difficult to just jump right in there and write 5,000 words, 500 words, whatever you were doing prior. So by allowing yourself to know that you're going to have less of an output and accepting that ahead of time, it will take a lot of the stress off your brain that you haven't been writing and that you haven't been putting out the work that you usually do. Just like any other process when you're writing a book, it takes days and days and days to put all those words together. Most people will not sit down and write an entire book in a day. It is almost impossible. There are a lot of people who can do it that are professionals and will do this on occasion, but to keep that up on a regular basis isn't usually feasible and people will burn out that way anyway. So the thing that you can learn from that is it always takes baby steps. However, you might need to take even smaller steps when you're trying to build yourself back up. So one of the things I would recommend here is to maybe cut your normal goal in half. If you write 5,000 words a day, maybe only shoot for 2,500. If you write 500 words a day, only shoot for 250. The reason of reducing this goal is that it does take stress off you of the amount of stuff that you need to finish. I know that there's a lot of people out there who might be like, no, I'm just going to leave my goal as it is, but I'm just going to accept the fact that I might be producing less. Well, in my experience, and maybe not in yours, I do find that if you don't reduce that goal, then you still end up getting disappointed. You might get to the point where you're like, yeah, I wanted to write 1,000 words today, but I'm going to be okay if I don't hit it. Well, if I still don't hit it, I know I didn't hit it. I know I didn't get to the point where I wanted to be. So it is kind of a little bit of a mind trick of saying, this is what my goal is, and that I'm meeting that goal or maybe exceeding that goal, and giving myself that little bit of an ego boost, that little bit of an adrenaline high from hitting that goal, as opposed to disappointing myself by not hitting my regular goal. If you don't have word goals, maybe it's something like, if you write every day, maybe it needs to be reduced to write every second day. Or a lot of it can even just be that you showed up. Hey, I'm going to write 3 times this week for 15 minutes. And typically you're a once a day writer, or, you write 3 or 4 hours 4 times a week, or whatever it happens to be. By lowering your expectations and making a plan with those lowered expectations, you will be able to see, first off, that you can still accomplish your goals and what you need to do without having to push yourself when you're not ready. And secondly, you can also give yourself those good or easy wins to make sure that you have good spirits and good morale going into this process, so that you aren't adding extra stress or adding extra trauma into your life when you're already dealing with something else on the outside. My second recommendation would be to write out of chronological order. Some people do this anyway, so it might not be a very good tip for you, but if you are one of those people who writes their story from front to back, then maybe trying to write out of order might make things easier for you. Now, why would you want to do that? One of the reasons for this is because you're trying to build momentum and you're trying to build enthusiasm for the writing that you're doing, because you're already dealing with usually some very negative thoughts in the background. So by being able to write scenes that you're very much looking forward to, then this might make things a little bit easier and draw you into the story a little better. So let's say you want to do a particular fight scene and you're really looking forward to it because it's got some really cool jujitsu moves or whatever. And you've been waiting and waiting and waiting because it's so far down in the book. If you're trying to get back into writing, maybe it's time to write that scene right now. There might be some changes from how you write it now to how it will be in the end, but with edits, most of the time there's going to be changes in your scenes anyway. However, if you are writing that scene that, sparks that fire in you and makes you excited, then there's a better chance that you're going to be able to go back and write some of those more mundane scenes earlier on in the book that are necessary but aren't as exciting as certain scenes, and keep you moving forward. Getting that little bit of enthusiasm and that little bit of a win is going to make things a little bit easier. So maybe try writing some scenes outside of chronological order and see if that helps a little bit. In conjunction with that last tip, one of the other things that's really important, and this may take some time for you to figure out, is you need to figure out when to lean in and when to lean back when you're trying to deal with other things. What do I mean by this? Well, if you're dealing with certain situations, when you're writing, it can either trigger or inspire you. Here's an example. For me, when I am grieving or someone I know has passed away, I am not very good with working with either violent scenes or scenes that involve death. I have a really hard time dealing with them mentally right after something like that's happened. It does trigger a little bit. It's very emotional for me. So I will lean back from those scenes. I will avoid writing those scenes until I'm a little bit more mentally prepared to do so. And I know that about myself, and I will avoid that. And why is it important for you to lean back? If you are going to be triggering yourself every single time that you're writing, then you aren't going to move forward very well. And it's actually probably going to take its toll on you a little bit harder with having to deal with whatever situation it is you're dealing with. You don't want to make yourself worse off by writing than you were before you started writing. So my suggestion is, when you know there's certain things that are going to trigger you and you know there's certain things in your personality, don't force yourself to write them. And if you can write out of chronological order, maybe skip those scenes and come back to them, or avoid them altogether until you're ready to deal with them. The contrary to that is essentially leaning in. And what that is basically using your emotions to further your writing. For instance, if I get into a catastrophic fight with my husband, I have really, really bad stress at work, or, you know, dealing with rejections through the query process, I can be very stressed out. I can be very angry. I can be very hurt. But for me, I like to lean in those situations. So I'm particularly going to pick scenes that are, you know, where the heroine breaks up with her awful boyfriend, or where there is a street fight, or where there is something really, really intense, or an argument or something like that. I'm going to want to write those scenes, and I'm going to basically channel those emotions into what I'm doing and basically kind of use it as a little bit of therapy. So if you know the things that you can use to your advantage, this can really actually help your writing, because you can really feel that scene and kind of work through some of those issues in a kind of constructive way. One caution on that, I do find sometimes that I go a little bit overboard in the scenes a little bit. So sometimes I will have to rein it back a little through edits. But, you know, when I'm pushing all of that emotion into a scene that requires a lot of emotion, it can be a little bit draining, but it kind of helps me work through some of the things in my head. It lets me, you know, say things through my characters, or work out things through my characters that I haven't necessarily verbalized or been able to work out on my own yet. So in a lot of situations where I have had the chance to lean into certain scenes and use those emotions in those particular characters and in those particular instances, it has actually helped me move on a little bit better. But like I said, this is a personal choice, and it's something that you need to figure out for yourself, and it might take a little bit of experimentation, but it's making sure that you lean back from those scenes that trigger you and lean into those scenes that could possibly help you out or get you fired up or excited. Another recommendation on getting back into writing when you're dealing with things emotionally is to edit. Editing takes a little bit of a different brain than the creative aspect of writing. So by editing some of the work that you've already done on a particular manuscript, it helps brush that up, because this is something that you're going to have to do anyway once you're done. But it requires a different mindset, and it's a little bit more methodical than it is creative. So you can get yourself back into the story slowly. You know, you're rereading, you're fixing things. You can start building that passion and stoking that fire for what you're doing, as opposed to not working on anything at all and completely removing yourself from the story. One of the things I might have mentioned before, or will probably mention again, is one of the best ways to keep with your writing is to stay in the story, even if you aren't writing every single day, but to keep your head in the story. So even if you're editing, you're still in that world with those characters. You're still seeing that sort of language that you're using. You're in that setting and can be able to see those things. So even if you aren't actually creating new content for your book or your novella or whatever it is you're writing, you're still kind of in that world and keeping your head essentially in the game until you are ready to start again. My only caution with this one, though, is it's very easy to fall into the editing trap and not get yourself back into the creative writing space because you just spend so much time on the edits. So, you know, you probably want to be cognizant on how long you're spending on those sorts of things and whether it's time to move back into the original project as opposed to spending all that time with editing. A similar thing to this recommendation could also be doing that research that you've put off. If you are one of those people who leaves placeholders or things like that as you're writing and you need to, you know, research cars from the 1950s or hairstyles from the 1980s or whatever it is that you need, you can do those sorts of things as well. You can also, you know, if you're working on developing your characters or work on outlining or something like that, just anything that kind of keeps you within your story world and is moving you forward, but doesn't necessarily need to be actually writing prose. And my last recommendation is to gather inspiration. That can be reading within your genre, watching TV or whatever, or movies within your genre, or something like that that's going to possibly inspire you or get you back into writing. You can watch other things and whatever and be inspired, but from my experience, the more I'm kind of in that world, I'm going to want to produce work in that world. I get inspired to, you know, if I'm writing about witches and then I'm watching movies or reading books about witches, then I'm going to be more inspired to want to do witchy things. So that kind of works for me, but reading is always a huge inspiration because you get to see other work and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of people out there who are authors, one of the reasons they became an author is because of the books that they used to read and wanting to get their ideas out on the page just like their favorite authors. So, you know, building that inspiration and stuff again is fantastic. If you are on a deadline, this might be a little bit difficult to do because you need to be producing words as opposed to just consuming them. But if you are just trying to get back into a pattern, then maybe take that writing time that you would have. So let's say you've booked off a half an hour, 3 days a week to be writing, then maybe during that time you read instead. So you get into that habit of actually sitting down at your desk to do the writing, but instead you're going to use it to read and use that more as a little bit more of a balm to the stuff that you're dealing with in your head, as opposed to actually writing down and causing yourself a little bit more grief. So hopefully one of those tips will help you out getting back into writing after you've been through something that is weighing on your brain. So that's basically knowing your limitations and understanding that you are not going to be up to the level that you were before and giving yourself a break. Writing outside of chronological order to inspire you, leaning into those emotions that you think would be very useful in your writing, leaning back from those scenes or emotions that may trigger you, taking up writing tasks like editing or outlining or research to help you stay within the story world without actually doing the prose writing that is causing you stress, and fostering your inspiration by reading and consuming other materials within your genre. I'm sure it's been a very stressful time for everybody right now in March 2020. So I do hope that you and your loved ones are safe and happy and everything is okay with you. But if you are feeling overwhelmed or stressed, know that there are a lot of people out there just like you that are feeling a lot of that pressure and are trying to deal with it the best they can as well. So I do hope that everyone is doing okay, and hopefully you will come back next week and I will be able to spend some more time with you. If you would like to hear more videos from me, make sure you're hitting that subscription bar and the notification bell. And if you liked this video and would like to see more content like it from me, make sure you're giving it a thumbs up and I will make sure that I keep making them. So to everyone out there, have a happy and safe week, and I will see you next Thursday.